Hey Ted,
We have,
nice to meet you.
likewise. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah. Yesterday, Ted and I kind of did a crash course of clay with my very limited knowledge and kind of starting to mess around with what that export would look like for our initial contacts. And then today, we put together a just kind of like a preview of what the types of companies we would want, and then we're like learning like what the technical, not limitations, but kind of how this is all going to flow. Like for example, I realized as I was trying to build a suppression list, that we could only have 50,000 contacts in a table. So that's one example of something I was going to run by you as we start to build this out.
Yeah, that's a real limitation. I mean, the one of the challenge, I think one of the ways you can kind of overcome that to some extent, one is you can at least upload that entire list instantly, which will prevent you from at least getting to the point of when you email them where you can't send to them because if you negate it on the block list, the problem it doesn't solve is that Clay has a row limit no matter who you are of 50,000 people. So 50,000 rows, right? So it becomes one of those situations where when I've had suppression lists that big, the only solution was to do multiple lookups within one table to four or five different tables. And it slows it down, but I've tried Google Sheets, I've tried like cloud databases, and none of them are just yet good enough to do a lookup to with any kind of speed. Like Google Sheets, I thought was the answer of like putting 200,000 emails on a Google Sheet, but it's too big to operationalize, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
You said you were able to select multiple tables in suppression when you were doing it, or
Yeah, so what you could do is you basically build, let's just say there's 250,000, Ted. You can build five tables of 50,000 each.
right.
And then within the suppression table or within your lead table, for example, so I go pull a lead and it's John at smith.com and he's on that suppression list. Then for every lead list, I'm going to have to run that lookup table five times to each
Oh,
individual
I see.
table. And if
Yeah.
one of them match, then it stops the workflow. I don't think Clay's addressed it because not very many people have suppression lists that big. Right now, on the other side of it is, I just kind of lived with it because the client I had, you know, I think we had like 480,000 people on the suppression list. And I didn't want to wait for nine lookup tables to run for every single lead. So what I ended up doing is just getting the client to agree that we're going to put everybody on the block list and instantly, and then at least we'll never email them. The drawback is you end up sometimes paying for like email verification cost on somebody that you ultimately don't email.
Okay. And then to perform the lookup, would I just go to at enrich, and then is that like a function within Clay?
Yeah, let me show you. So I'll put it in your environment here. So we'll just do it in the same table. So let's just take one of these emails address right here, go to a custom table, and we'll just call it email. Oh, it's a new table. So we'll just put that email address here. So imagine you can have as many of these you want, right? Up to 50,000 rows. So you could have five of these and they could all just be email addresses. And then you come here and you do lookup. You do always do multiple rows. That way, in case it exists more than once,
Okay.
which you would hope wouldn't happen, but it could happen. And then you go, that's called, you just like, it helps if you name it correctly, but I just left it as custom table. So hopefully this is the right one, and we'll see. It might not be. Let me get out of this for a second. You want to name this?
Oh, like name it more specific so you know which one it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That way we can find it. And you know, sometimes one, like you got to refresh so Clay remembers that you made a change.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go add enrichment. And then think of this as like an Excel VLOOKUP. That's basically what it's doing. And it's being weird today. Yeah, Clay is being extremely odd today, so it's slow and not acting normal, but we'll find it. Okay, multiple rows and other tables. So the concept of this is you basically say, this is the table I want you to search in. So see it now, it pops up, lookup email.
Mm-hmm.
And then the target column, there's only one column, so it's pretty easy. It's called email. And you want it to either equal or contain. So we're going to say equal. And then we're going to tell it the row value. So this one, I actually did that wrong. I should be doing Ohio suppression. There you go. And there it is, email. So you basically pointing the two tables to each other. That makes sense? And you're saying, are they equal? And you hit save. And then now when I run this, it's gonna look through that table and find that email. You see the drawback of this is that it's slow, right? So imagine running this 7 times. That's what it would take to do this for every single email. Now, the better way I would have actually built it, and I should have just built it over here to look up to this table, if that makes sense. But either way works. And you can do that with any table. So part of when this becomes a nice thing to know is, let's just say you pull down a lead list from somewhere, you import it into CSV, and you already have a table built that runs the way you want to. You can, in theory, you could do lookups and put the data into any table you want doing this. That makes sense.
So we probably have a suppression list that's a little over 100,000. So we probably might have like 3 sheets, and then we'd set that up for each of them.
Yeah. So you see how it went through this Ohio suppression table. Mm-hmm. It found that email, which I copied randomly from, I think it was row 18. And it said this. The nice thing is if you had other values there, it would pull the other values. So that's where this becomes useful. We only have email in there, but let's just say you had name, city, phone number. It would pull every value that was in that row. So that's why this function is pretty useful, even if you're doing it for other things besides suppression.
Gotcha. So we there's probably companies, there's definitely contacts we'd suppress at the contact level, but then we could also do that for domains to block entire companies or clients.
Yeah, if you want to do that, what I always do is I write a formula. Let's just say all I have is the email, and I just point it to the email address and say everything after @ And remember, the formula generator, probably the most underutilized tool in Clay. It's free. So it's like a little baby GPT. And now, just like that, I have the domain name.
Nice.
And if you write this formula once, it'll trim every single campaign. I mean, every single email address that way. And you could do the lookup. If you wanted to do a lookup to just domains, you could do the same thing.
And so we have these sheets that let us know the record is in there, and then would we go back to our the table we're working out of, and then just, I guess, delete those contacts based on this?
You could. I mean, what I would probably do is leave them in the table and set the next step after this. So let's just say this is the first thing I do. And let's say in theory I was going to Just trying to find an enrichment here. Perform a Google search. Well, we won't actually do it, but we'll just put it in there. And this could be anything, right? What you want to do is set this as a condition to run based off the output of the previous column. So this run if column becomes pretty critical, and you can do this with the same formula concept. So I don't want to spend money, like this is 2 clay credits. I don't want to spend money if you got a match here, right? Is that what you're asking, Juan? Like, I don't want to do anything else in this table. I think you asked, should we delete them? I would tell you that it's going to create like somewhat of an administrative nightmare because you're always going to be filtering and deleting.
Right.
What I would do is just stop the table if I got a match. So let's just say this was our match column right here. Then I would say I just only run if is you use this anytime you want it to be conditional.
Right.
So you just come in here and say, and it's really this easy. You can say email is, you got to select the column. Email is, I only want it to run if email is empty. And so it's telling me, no, it will not run because we know the email is not empty, right? So now when I go to run this, it's going to say run condition not met because I told it don't run if there's a value here, if there's an email here. Mm-hmm. So instead of going through a list of like 20,000 and just filtering and deleting, I would just, I always build my tables for as many leads or whatever I'm going to put in the rows, but I build conditions for things to stop along the way if they meet a certain condition.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think we'll probably have to build that out and just test to see how that looks. Do you have any questions on that, Ted?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm still I don't think so. I'm still also want to maybe explore the possibility of if we're going to enrich with some of the ZoomInfo credits that we already have, if maybe we would use suppression at that stage versus doing it this way. But I think we could try both. At least we could do this on like, a couple hundred results and see if we're comfortable with doing it across the full searches and our full suppression.
Yeah, there's 2 things you have to think about it from that perspective, though. It's basically like suppressing before you go into ZoomInfo. Is you'd want to be conscious of the fact that there's 2 types of ways to essentially avoid sending to companies. One is what the email address is, right? So you just exclude anybody that has that email address. But to your point earlier, Juan, the domain level approach matters too, because if you don't do both, then you could email to someone else at the same company, right? And if they may be suppressed because they're one of your customers. So that's a challenge there. But the other thing is sometimes you do want to, depending on the client you're targeting and the company as a whole, especially if they're in divisions from an account-based marketing perspective, you may still want to email people that are at the same company. So that's just choices you want to consider before you decide how you suppress, because both can have impact either way.
Right. Okay. So I think next steps on this part of it, Ted, maybe I'd go through and just set up the suppression list and build those lookups and see if we can get that functioning and making sense for us.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a way. I mean, yeah, at least even if we just did one of the lists for now, knowing that we'd have to have probably 3 or so, good just to build the table and make sure it's working right.
Okay. So then, Josh, I think so Ted and I this morning kind of put together this this search, and it's if you click on our main Clay, like the list of all the different tables that we have, it is the export test. And so I remember you saying that you start with find companies in order to pull certain important data like headcount and things like that. So we pulled in a number of companies. This was just kind of like a very broad search. We just kind of filtered out industries we wouldn't want, selected the ones we would, and then I duplicated your find companies table and added it into this workbook. So I guess the next question,
find people at those companies, right? So then essentially
yeah.
we could now, based on the companies that we found, which is probably too broad to start, but was just a trial, that we could kind of go through and start finding some people.
Mm-hmm. So assuming we have our suppression list set up, operating the way we need it to, I wanted to see if you could help us run through the steps to kind of get these companies. I think we'd want to like identify those decision makers and then maybe get them into that next tab, or is that done in that next tab?
It's probably easier to start here. So you did define companies, right? And what you can do is come straight to this action menu and put find people at these companies.
Okay.
So when you do that in this exact method, you're going to get this company data to go to the people table, which is what's important. So you get this size and demographic information that you get from Clay. And here is where you do so it's basically the same menu that you use to pull company, except it's only confined to people, if that makes sense. Do you want to pick a couple job titles that we can build you a sample, or I can just easy stop sharing and let you do it if it would help, whatever's easiest.
Yeah, marketing director would be a good place to start, because we'll probably redo this as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Should be able to do director. I think there was actually
they might have it as director of marketing, or vice president of marketing is also.
Yeah, I swear. I saw digital directing marketing. Okay. Yeah, this is probably big enough as it is. But the other thing you can do too is just do marketing, and then you could do different levels. That makes sense. Maybe you don't want the owner, but
there we go.
Yeah, and we can always preview it.
Do you usually spend a lot of time excluding title things? Like we previously on ZoomInfo, we would type in marketing director or something like that, and we take out like the very regional certain words that we just. Do you find that Clay just kind of has a very broad pool in, or does it like do it like, okay, it has to match this specifically, this title specific?
No, it's not. It's definitely not. It's definitely not, because if you see how some of these titles are managing director,
yeah,
those aren't the roles we were asking for, right? So It's very text driven, and I would tell you, like, there's no tool, I think, per se that's really figured this out. ZoomInfo, Apollo. The only way to really drill it down is to keyword it in and be very particular in doing individual searches and looking at it, because the problem is not the tool. The problem is that, Allison decided to call her managing director in Latin American, but this person decided to call themselves managing director. That's the problem. Right. Everybody names their own. They name themselves in LinkedIn what their job title is. They don't pick from a master list, and so it's always going to be historically bad. And it's how much time you spend to clean it up is the difference, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Well, we can do.
We'll have to filter for location again, even though we did it at the company level.
Yeah. I'm going to do. I was thinking that too. I'm just going to give you 1,000 if that's okay. One,
Mm-hmm.
so your list is not too big. And that's a common thing to forget. So you want to scroll down on the bottom and make sure you tell it how many you want. Because by default, it's 50. So you
Right.
always have to kind of come in and up it, if that makes sense. So it's going to import 1,000. And so there you can do 2 existing tables. Since we have one, I'm just going to do to a new one so I know it's clean.
Okay.
And this is where if you wanted to spend clay credits to enhance things, you could, but we're just going to not do that for now. And it's going to build the default list. Might
Okay.
take a second. I can see it at the bottom of the screen popping up. So.
And if we were to have clicked like the existing table, I think I cloned what you had in that other table. Right now it's set up so that it wouldn't actually use any credits. Is that right?
Correct.
Like without
Everything
us.
you've done, everything you've done so far is entirely free.
Yeah.
So that method we talked about it's solely for the benefit of this lookup. So we talked about lookups earlier on suppressions. All this value is doing a lookup to this company table that we created. And that's why it's much better to build your company list and then import people, find people
Yeah.
at those companies, because Clay has it set up automatically to pull that data. And
Gotcha.
then you can see it starting to come in. And so this is your people list, right? But what nested within this is the company data as well. So like if they have a size data. So it's not that much richer, but this is a nice description of the company. It's good for writing copy, to be honest with you, because it's written by the company. So they always spice it up a little bit. You can tell this one's Let's Unify,
Oh,
but
and
this
then
is the company. You can use that. Yeah, you can use that to reference in the copy. You don't see it by default, right? But any of this data, like they're in Kirkland, Washington. I'm going to create a column there.
I was going to say, so you can add them as columns. That's what I was just going to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that is exactly why you pull company versus people, because if you see that data, the domain was there. So the domain was there, but you did not get the description or the location of the company themselves. And here's a good reason why. This person, Scott Benson, he is in Bellevue. That's from his people search, but the company itself is in Kirkland, according to LinkedIn.
Gotcha.
And it takes a while to populate. Doing it for all of them.
Is it a limit of, so that suppression limit that applies here too, right? So at one time we can really only pull 50,000 people.
Yeah, the table can never be bigger than 50,000.
Which isn't the worst. I mean, we plan to segment things pretty tightly. So
yeah, but I would tell you, if you organize this in folders and stuff, like you get pretty fast at just company lists. Because the other thing too, right, is you have, when you build these company lists, and I'll just build one from here. You can set up exclusions into the import of this company. So like, let's just say you have, the drawback is you can only do one, but you could exclude it from even looking at 50,000 domains by pointing it to a table that has 50,000 domains. Like, so that's your suppression list. You could literally get it to exclude half of your suppression list. If you could do more than 50,000, you could do it all. But you can tell it, don't even look at these 50,000 domains. And then when it goes to search, it's not going to consider those. So that's a nice little thing to have when you're doing that. And then Clay has also made this now recently, where if you click into these numbers, that's where you've done the searches. So like April 8th, March 31st, I can schedule this to run at intervals as well. So you can always have it updating in the background if you wanted it to, where it's if new ones pop up, and you could even automate the table to do things that way if you wanted to, like send emails if you leave the table live.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, that's how you get it's so here you're almost there, right? So for any email tool, you're going to either need first name, last name, and domain, or first name, last name, and LinkedIn profile. And so most of them are first name, last name, domain, but some of them are, I know you're going to go from here to ZoomInfo, but if you weren't and you were going to use any of the Clay email finders, then you would either need first name, last name, domain, or first name, last name, and LinkedIn profile. And you have both here. So.
Okay. So I feel pretty good about next steps on the suppression, kind of experimenting there. So we have that, and then we take these here to ZoomInfo. I know, Ted, we're still going to talk to ZoomInfo and see what suppression capabilities are there too.
Well, and
do you
yeah,
have
and
any questions on this flow?
when we build out like our first find people, I think in addition to what we have here, I think our plan was to also add some of the waterfalls and things that Josh had kind of built into that one example already, right? So we had like the normalized company, we had the ESP check, and a couple of verifier tools. So we could easily, as we started to build like our first official list here, we could essentially just add those waterfalls into that sheet as well, much in the same way you already, right? Gosh, I did have one question on the verifying tools. So I know in the one that you set up and in the past conversation with Mike and Juan, you had highlighted that you've used I think Million Verifier and BounceBan as two tools with a lot of success. I did notice in the Clay like 101 video series they touched on a zero bounce tool. I didn't know if you had ever used that, and they said they typically start with that because that's the best one in their opinion, at least in the video. I was just curious, like if you've had more success with the two that you suggested prior than that one.
I've used them all, Ted, to be honest with you. And so the reason why we've used Million Verifier and BounceBan is a little harder to get to because you have to write the API call to them. They're just the best balance of cost and effectiveness. Like we average about half a percent bounce rate using both consistently across every single industry. And so but I've used them all. Like it's much more convenient to use the ones that are built into Clay, to be honest with you, because we don't have to write API calls and I don't have to worry about paying for those providers separately. But the lift is the Million Verifier is pretty common. It's built into a whole bunch of different lead gen tools. The BounceBan, I think, is the secret sauce because Million Verifier outputs verified or catch-all. And most people will skip the catch-alls and just write them off. And we take those catch-alls and then run them through BounceBan. And I'd say 80% of them become usable. And so it increases our usable emails dramatically. And it's just between that and the balance of, industry says you should run 2% bounce rate. We're 1/4 of that consistently. And I've tested so many of them, and I even get hit up by these vendors wanting me to try them, but I'm almost like, why? If it's not broke, don't fix it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. Appreciate that.
Not to say there couldn't be something better, right? To be fair, but
so if we did want to add, you helped us build out those columns. I did update the APIs. I signed up for Million Verifier and all that. If we wanted to copy those columns from those like tables that we already have built out, how do we do that? Like maybe add those columns here. Would we need to rebuild them from scratch again, or can we copy a column?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me get in there. Do you remember? Is it which one it's in?
That
I don't-
the one at the bottom is the one that we worked from where you built
We
things
did.
out.
Okay. Yeah. So if you come in here, so the easiest, there's a couple ways you can do this. So any of these API calls, or even when you're using like some of the AI stuff, if you go into the column, you can save these as templates.
Ah, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. So we're gonna, if we save this as template, we'll just call it million verifier. And we'll say initial verification. And then, so now you can just add them as a table really quickly as a template. And then let me do BounceBan too.
Perfect.
And I'll show you in the other table. So I'm going to show you two things, one, that are nice to know. So I think we were in what, export test.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously you'd need an email, but let's just assume you have an email. You would do add enrichment, and these are all going to be, they probably will come up under a search. Let me see. Yeah, they do. So they're here. That's the one I just created. And then you would just need to feed it the email. I'm going to give it a bogus column right now. And it just injects it with whatever column I obviously we don't have an email, so I gave it first name. But do you see how it copied over the API key and everything? It would be
Gotcha.
ready to use.
So it copies everything. We just have to update the
Point it
endpoint.
to the right column. Yeah, just because you could do this in theory in every table, and maybe your email column is called something else in a different table. So it makes you tell it what table to look at. The other thing too, I'll show you, and this is relatively new, but you can add your own waterfalls. And the nice thing is I think it's the email. And so you can actually add these APIs. I think I'm going to just type BounceBan. Let's do million. Let's do it how we would do it. Million. I might have to do the API actually. And then I choose the template. Million verifier. Same thing. We don't have a real email, so I'm just going to give it some bogus column. But let me make sure so I'm not jumping too far ahead. Do you guys, you comfortable with what a waterfall is?
The way I understand it is it's just a series of columns that'll take action on the data.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, just think of it's like, it's action that steps. So if you have two email verifiers, if the first one doesn't find it, the second one invokes. If it does find it, it stops. So it's only going to take the additional steps if the first one. So the nice thing is it just made it where you can build your own custom waterfalls. So I'm just giving you a quick sample, but I did million verifier first, and then I could add a second action, and it can be anything. I'm just using API calls, but basically you can build waterfalls and it's just add action. You add as many as you want. But I'll show you what one looks like that Clay already built. So email enrichment is one that they've already built. And it's this. So it's connecting. These are all email providers, right? And waterfalls are cool because like I know drop contact is not very good. Hunter's okay. These are the four I like to use. And so, and in this order, because lead magic's cheaper, one credit. And I don't pay for I don't pay for validation because we use Million Verifier and BounceBan. And I'll just add this. This is what Ted was just talking about in a minute. And one, remind me, all these calls are recorded, so I could just shoot you the recording if you ever want it. But see, now it's created a waterfall of these four. So if I ran this and it didn't find it with lead magic, then it would go to find email. Then it would go to Prospeo. Then it would go to Wizza. And if any one of them found the email, then it would put it here in this work email column. So Clay has a lot of these built for like phone numbers, emails, but you can also build them yourself with any enrichment or any API call. So it's a good, once you start building tables you're really comfortable with and you want to use over and over again, you start to do this kind of stuff so that next week when you need to add new leads, you don't have to start over, or you don't have to. Templates and waterfalls can save you dramatic amount of time once you get things working the way you want to.
Right. So in theory, I think in the example table you built, you had million verifier and BounceBan, and the intention was you're going to run those both for every record. But hypothetically, if you only wanted to run the second one, if the first one didn't verify or didn't, yield a result, you could build it as a waterfall.
Yeah, and it's a little tricky there because with million verifier, that's like the first pass of the verification. And a lot of those will pass. They'll come out and say, okay.
Yeah.
And so we never run BounceBan, right? It stops. But if million verifier says catch all email, then we run BounceBan. And so we never run them. We only run them both if the outcome of million verifier is catch all. But to your point, to answer your question, this could say million verifier BounceBan, and the condition of the second one could be any output of the first one. The other thing I want to show you about these guys too. So like, remember how from Million Verifier and BounceBan, I had you sign up for the API and we can only call them via API. The one thing I want you guys to know about Clay, if you don't know this, is every one of these, you can also call their API. So you don't have to pay 2 credits and 1 credit. You can just as easily switch this over. And if you have an API, it would be, you can add it by logging in or putting the API key. And I will tell you, in every scenario, paying for the API key is going to be cheaper than paying for Clay credits.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know for when we potentially move from ZoomInfo.
Did you say you already looked into potential API from ZoomInfo and it was going to be either incremental to what we're already spending or
yeah,
more?
Thanks for reminding me on that. So Josh, I remember you said we may be able to get away with not needing the API from ZoomInfo, and I tried to set that up and I ran into a snag. So I don't remember exactly what it said, but it wasn't letting me. It was like some kind of error. So I was just curious if you could run through that and just show what that would look like.
Yeah, so in Clay,
that's what it was. I tried to.
Yeah.
It gave me a login, and I tried to log in with our account, and it wasn't registering.
Yeah, so here it's basically here. You name this whatever you want, ABC, Juan, whatever, and then you log in with your user ID and password.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's subjective because, like with HubSpot, if I have a HubSpot account and the HubSpot enrichment, I can log in and it will work. It does not require API access. And ZoomInfo is set up that way too. So it may just be worth, because I know you told me they're like, it's whatever this much to have API access. But at least with the ZoomInfo login, they have set it up where I don't have to put in an API key. I just have to put in a user ID and password. So I think even if it's not working, it may be worth pursuing up to the point that someone tells you no. Because, and again, I'd have to know what your plan is and everything. But all that is to say that Clay has already built the connection with ZoomInfo. They're not requiring an API to make it. They're requiring a user ID and password to get in. And that may be your way to use it without having to upload all of that, but it's very nuanced to the plan. Like Apollo is the complete opposite, where it's like same thing, and this may be what you're running into with ZoomInfo. You can log into user ID and password, but nobody uses Apollo and Clay because it's like 100 row rate limit per hour, and it's like who wants to wait an hour to run 100 rows every time, right? So it's a little bit more complicated than I'm making it sound when it comes to rate limits and APIs, but it still may be worth asking the question until you get the answer is no, because you also may be able to do it this way versus uploading it all to ZoomInfo.
Right. Okay, we can keep messing around with that and maybe reach out to our rep.
And it may just be like, I assume you use your account one. It may be a permissions issue for you in ZoomInfo. That's where it's all account specific. But I'd say if you try it with an administrator and you still can't get in.
We don't have the API.
Well, I know, Mike, but I think it's more of like what I'm saying is that Clay didn't build this to have the API. It's not asking for the API, which is what's unique about it. And Apollo is the same way. Like I don't have to have the API to log into Apollo. Excuse me, HubSpot. I don't have to have the API to log into Apollo. So I'm just trying to say like it may be one of those things where I know you don't have API access, but they didn't build it to require you to have the API. So it may be worth just making sure that it's not a permissions issue because they're not.
If it is, or if it's not, and it's just like, is there a way we can just export and pull it into ZoomInfo to enrich?
Yeah, well, and that's the question because it's all technically yes, but it's all of what they allow you to do on your plan, and that's the nuance of these companies.
I mean, for us, we can do if we had a CSV with first name, last name, company, or whatever, you could do it.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
I thought I was pushing along a little bit on this more so because it's like, why do all that if you can do it right?
No,
here?
For sure, it would save you a lot of time. And yeah.
That being said, I know how these companies are too, and they're not going to make it easy for you to not spend money.
Yeah.
So the other question that I had, we're pulling in these companies. At which point does it make sense to filter out Microsoft ones that are using Microsoft for their email? I know we have that ESP column that we built out at the contact level. And when I took a look at your sheet, I saw that you had like Google, Mimecast, and I didn't really see any Microsoft. Were those just hidden rows, or do you not pull Microsoft somehow?
No, I go to every extreme of the earth to not send to Microsoft.
Right.
So when we filter a lot of the data we pull from Apollo today, we exclude Microsoft and by saying only using people who have Gmail, Proofpoint, or Mimecast. And then, so that's our first level of filter.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the first level of filter. It doesn't stop them all because this one thing to know about this data, it doesn't matter if it's ZoomInfo, LinkedIn, Apollo. There's always some level of outdatedness to it, per se. So the second level is the ESP checker. And that's where from there, we are deliberately, if output of the ESP check is Outlook, the workflow stops.
Juan, did you have a pretty good sense of that first step? Because I didn't really follow how he's filtering that out initially. I get the ESP check.
Well, and I think Mike looked into that. Mike's back. I think Mike looked into that. I don't know that there was the ability to properly filter out by technology.
Yeah, there wasn't. There is, but we'd have to pay more.
You're talking about on the ZoomInfo level? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, that's the problem. So Apollo basically says like it has Gmail itself as a technology. It has Mimecast and Proofpoint, which are going to cover. It also has Outlook, by the way, but we just exclude Outlook. But I think ZoomInfo had that limitation. I did think you could make. Sorry, I thought you could make the inference that if they're using Google in any capacity, they're probably using.
Did we lose you, Josh?
Trying to prevent you from the dog barking parade of someone knocking on the door. But I think you can make the inference that I don't think we went too deep in that, but if they're using Google, I'm going to tell you because Google is generally a technology that they have in there as a whole, like Google Workspace. There's a 99.2% chance they're not using Google Workspace and Outlook. But I would say if there's a cost reason, then just don't worry about it and put it in. It's hard. I mean, it's a hard problem because I assume you're going to be absorbing cost if you put stuff into ZoomInfo and then exclude it after the fact as the ESP checker, right? Is that
I think the whole half of this premise was that within Clay, you could create a waterfall that would first identify what would be Gmail before you would go find their email address.
Got it. So yeah, and I mean you can do that obviously in Clay because you're using waterfalls, but going out to ZoomInfo. So the solution to that would be one. Let me just put it. I want to put it as an example in this table. So you would say, I'll create 2 columns here, and you say Josh, and then the domain, and you need the @ sign, and you can do this by formula. Actually, I'm going to show you the cleanest way to do this. Let me add another column. We're just going to say @ I'm going to move these like this, and then we'll just say we'll use my domain, contentmarketingmedia.org. And this first name can be anything, so you can do info, whatever you want to do, right? And we're going to add, and the reason why we have to create it in 3 columns, just so you know, is because the domain changes, right? No matter who the client, whatever list you're pulling. All right. And so we're going to do a merge column. So this is another little Clay thing where you can merge 3 columns together pretty easily. And we're just going to say name @ we'll add a third @ domain. And it should work. If not, we can do it another way. No, it didn't work. Okay, we're gonna do it by formula. I know, but this is going to save you that. This is going to solve that problem. So just bear with me for a second. Name, and then @ and then domain. This should merge them together. Yeah. So see how I turned those 3 columns into an email. So why this matters is now what you could do, guys, is you could run the ESP against this and it would work. And then you'll find out. So you just need to create a list like this with your domains that you want to exclude and then run the ESP. And it'll run the ESP against any email address.
Wait, why would it be a list that we want to exclude? You would want to take lists that you want to find you know what I mean? This is like your step 1. You're finding the companies. You're trying to see which companies are Gmail or Outlook before you go find their email.
Exactly. So what I'm giving you is a made up email so that you can run it through the ESP checker, Mike. So then you can exclude those that are known to be already Outlook before you put it in ZoomInfo.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So
now is this the same cost of? Okay.
This would cost you nothing.
Yeah.
All you need to do is populate. You need to import here and put your domains all in this column. And then let me just show you.
And you're saying, Josh, that the first name part of that really doesn't matter?
It doesn't, no. The domain checker will work even if it's a real person or not.
Right. Or if their domain setup is first name dot last name, it still doesn't matter. It's really looking at the @
Exactly. It's only looking at this. Unfortunately, the domain checkers don't just allow you to put in the domain.
Gotcha.
So you gotta put in a real email. But now I set these columns to be defaulted. So every time you add a new row, it's going to add these for you. You just need to paste or import your domains and put them in this column and it'll run automatically.
Okay.
That makes sense, Juan? So you just add the ESP checker to here.
Yeah.
So essentially, Juan, I think as we start to build out a preliminary list, we would not only have some of the columns like down the list that Josh built in that initial task, but we would do this first before, insert these columns before the ESP, and that would then start to, suppress potential contacts before we ever even go to ZoomInfo.
Yeah, and I think did we build, I know I saved it. I can add it real quick so you guys have it all in one place.
And you recommend doing it this way where it lives in a separate tab?
No, you can put it in the same. You can put it in
I
the
think
same
it's just
table.
building it out, but I think then we could probably save this as a template, much like we did before, and then bring it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would do it in the same. I can't remember what I named it, but yeah, if you just add the email, it's in one of these tables. I'll just finish it for you. Oh, it's in this bottom one. Is what you told me one, right?
Yeah.
ESP
Yes,
check.
check.
There it is. And then we save it as a template, and then we'll just add it. So,
So that's the original export test is where our
Thank you.
Yeah.
And see, like we talked about earlier, I just saved it as a template. It came over.
Mhm.
Of course, I guess I deleted the email, but Josh. Let's do it. There.
And that's just Clay being Clay, I imagine.
Yeah, every time you make changes and stuff, it's just safe to refresh. But do you see how it verified those two right there? So that's it. So the simplest way from here is if you had your companies, just do action, import your CSV, and then all you do is just put your when it imports. I don't have one. I don't think I have one to put in there, but we'll just use that for example. I don't even know what's in here, but you just you would align your domain. Let's see if this pops up here. I don't have one, but it only has an email column. But you would just align your domain with the domain and add the table, and it would import all of those in there. Or to what Ted was saying, you could just save this and put it in, your find people's table, right? Because you have your domain in your find people's table, second one, and just add that little sequence I built, right here after LinkedIn profile, and then run it, and you already have all the domains right there, and then you would only be left with the ones that were not Outlook, and that would be what you put into ZoomInfo.
When you say you'd only be left with the ones that are not Outlook, at what point do those get filtered out?
Well, what he just built was a sequence or a series that
filter
ESP checker right there, that column he's on.
Yeah. So I guess Juan, what I'm saying is if you copy what I just built into that table, the find people table, exactly like this, then instead of these domains that I put here, you use the ones that are in the table, right? Then, and you run this email ESP checker, then you're going to exclude any of these that return to be Outlook. Or you're just going to.
So if I have an Outlook that was listed here, it wouldn't show up in that other table.
It would show up. It would. I don't know what it would say. It wouldn't go further
Right. It just wouldn't run. Okay.
Yeah, or even if you ran them all, like let's just say there's 1,000, you ran them all, and 200 of them are Outlook. You just filter, like you come to this table here and you filter by what's the name of that table? Email host, and you say, is not equal to Outlook, and that will give you all the ones that are not Outlook. Either way you want to do it, you're going to export it to CSV to put it in Apollo, so you could just easy delete them in the CSV file, whatever is easiest. But that will give you the list, so you're not wasting money on ones that are Outlook before you even, what I
Gotcha.
mean?
Yeah, no, I'm following.
That's kind of the solution to what Mike was talking about before, where even though you can't filter, if you do it in the beginning, then you don't have to worry about finding emails for people that we already know are Outlook.
Okay. All right. I know we're at time. Did you have any questions, Ted, or do you feel pretty good about next steps as well?
I feel pretty good. I think we just need to start with like a manageable list process and go through these column setups that Josh has built for us so far and see kind of how that works.
Okay. Quick tail end question, Josh. What's the aging period for domains when you start to notice them getting less effective?
It depends on, honestly, how much you abuse them. If you keep your limits to like 10 a day, you write unique copy, you don't include links, etc., they'll last forever. When you get anxious and want to send 15, 20, 25, 50, you start throwing in links. You don't take the time you send 5,000 people the same email for 3 months. When it can disappear in 2 weeks. It can last forever. It's really of how well you manage the outbound.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. It's kind of what we're seeing a little bit. So,
and I mean, offer selection matters too. Like, if you try to sell SEO to people that don't have a website, they're probably going to mark you spam a lot more often than people that do. Right. So their individual marking of spam also can contribute to that, but it generally will stay pretty low if you write professional emails to the right audience.
okay. Yeah, if you are able to send me this video, that would be helpful. But I feel pretty good about what we have to do next. So
that'd be great if we had this. I think we would definitely refer back to it.
Yeah, no worries. I got it recording, so I'll shoot it over to you. It takes about an hour or two to come to me, and then I'll forward it to you.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think we know enough to be dangerous at this point. We might as well start one tomorrow. And then, I mean, at some point, maybe it makes sense to see if Josh can kind of review, a preliminary list with us and just see if there's any holes he could shoot in it. But
okay.
Sounds good, guys. I'll be here. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Ted, too.
yeah, likewise. Appreciate the help.